Hi, everybody. Brad Truax here from Eastman's Woodlands and Wildlife Committee. And today we're continuing our series on the trees that we have here at Eastman. And today our focus is the maple tree. Obviously, much of her beautiful fall foliage is due to the colors of the maples. Uh, there are over 100 species of maples worldwide. At Eastman, we have mainly sugar maples and red maples. The sugar maples are taller. They may be up to 100 feet, whereas the red maples usually are only about 60 feet at their maximum height here. Both are very good shade trees, and both obviously contribute to our colorful autumn foliage. And there are many types of caterpillars actually chew the leaves of the maple. And if you remember, caterpillars in turn are very important because they're a good food source for young birds. The bark of maples harbors many insects, and those are good food sources for woodpeckers and other birds. And the seeds and flowers may be eaten by many birds, also by rodents, raccoons, rabbits, and even bears. Deer also eat the leaves and the small twigs, and beavers eat the wood and use it for building their lodges and dams. So maples have a significant impact on our wildlife. So how do we identify maple trees? Well, first of all, the branching pattern or the bud pattern is opposite. Remember that mnemonic that we've talked about, mad horse. Things that have opposite branching patterns are either maples, ash, dogwood, or horse chestnuts. The leaf pattern is simple. We'll show you the characteristic leaves. The bark is variable. I don't find the bark particularly helpful in identifying maple trees. And the seeds are samaras, and we'll talk about them. The maple leaf patterns, again, the sugar maple here at the top has 5 lobes, and typically the notches are more U-shaped compared to a V shape in the red maples. The red maple can have either 3 distinctive lobes or 5 distinctive lobes, and they're much pointier, and they tend to have these V-shaped notches. And the stems are typically red for the red maple. And of course, our neighbors to the north, the Canadian flag has a classic sugar maple leaf as its symbol. And the Toronto maple leaf also has a classic sugar leaf. Maple bark, as I mentioned, the bark is extremely variable. The younger maples tend to have lighter, smoother bark, and the older maples tend to have darker, furrowed bark that may look somewhat shaggy from a distance. And it's hard to distinguish maple types from each other by the bark. The maple seeds, as spinners or keys or whirlybirds or helicopters. And the formal name is actually samaras. They consist usually of 2 conjoined wings, each surrounding a seed. And the shapes do differ. Again, the top is a sugar maple samara and tends to have this kind of a U-shaped pattern. So I kind of remember that as U-shape for the sugar maple samara because the sugar maple leaves also tend to have U-shaped notches. The bottom is a red maple samara. And again, the red maples tend to drop their seeds at the end of spring, whereas the sugar maples tend to hold on to them sometimes as long as until autumn. In fact, most of this is June right now when we're doing this, and most of the samaras that we're seeing on the ground now are actually from the red maples. Uh, Maples do produce flowers, usually in the spring. And again, these appear before the leaves appear. So that may be why we often don't recognize them. And the sugar maple flowers tend to hang down as tiny yellow-green clusters. And the samaras actually develop from these flowers. The maples and fall foliage are important. Again, they're the biggest contributors to beautiful fall colors that we see here in New Hampshire. You can see them here in this picture up here. And of course, there are other trees there as well, but the maples are big contributors to that colorful fall foliage. And the red maples are also often known as swamp maples, and they tend to turn red earliest in the fall. So here you're seeing a few swamp maples. Sugar maples are certainly good for wildlife. Squirrels and chipmunks and white-footed mice eat the samaras. The white-tailed deer browse on the twigs and the buds. Yellow-bellied sapsuckers will drill holes in them and extract the sap and eat the insects. And many species eat the cambium, which is an inner portion of the bark. And obviously, humans love the sap and the maple syrup that comes from the sap. So there is a commercial value to maples. They're a value mainly for their maple syrup production. The maple syrup market size is valued at $1.5 billion in 2024. The maples also have some value as lumber. Bowling pins, pool cues, butcher blocks, and tonewood are often made from the lumber of maples. And the wood grain may be highly decorative. They're not of much value for firewood, mainly because of the sap content, and also because they're usually kept for their value as producing sap and maple syrup rather than being used for something like firewood. And of course, tourism. Leaf peepers contribute to New England's economy every autumn when they come out to look at the beautiful fall foliage. So what about maple syrup? Maple sap usually begins running in mid to late February, although with climate change, we've seen that the sap has been flowing earlier. Warmer days and cold nights get the sap running. So typically the sap flows when the temperatures are still below freezing at night and in the 30s to 40s during the daytime. And you may see tiny icicles on the tips of the sugar maple twigs as a signal that flow has actually started. And the sap is then converted to maple syrup. New Hampshire is actually the third leading producer of maple syrup after Vermont and Maine. There's an interesting symbiotic relationship between trout lilies and sugar maples. Trout lilies, pictured down here, often grow in the understory of sugar maples. And if you remember when we've talked about the complex mycorrhizal fungal connections that occur between various trees and other plants, there's a very complex mycorrhizal fungal connection between the maples and the trout lilies. And the directional flow changes depending upon the season. So trout lilies flower in the fall as the maples are losing their leaves, and the nutrients are transferred from the maples to the trout lilies. Spring, though, has the opposite pattern. In spring, the nutrients are transferred from the trout lilies to the maples. So it's a very interesting symbiotic relationship. Okay, red maples, they're obviously easy to spot in the fall because of the brilliant red colors. And again, those swamp maples that are the earliest signs of fall are actually red maples. Here you see some swamp maples. Red maples actually are the most abundant tree in eastern North America. Very interesting fact. Here at Eastman, they outnumber the sugar maples 2-1 in Heath Forest, but the opposite is true in Upper Johns Glen. Most red maples only grow to about 60 feet tall, and that's shorter than our sugar maples, which are often up to 100 feet tall. And red maples are relatively drought tolerant, and they readily adapt to a variety of conditions, and they can grow in either shade or sunlight. So that probably accounts for the fact that they're the most abundant tree in the Northeast. And red maples are usually only live up to about 100 years old. They have relatively thin bark, and it's easily damaged from ice and storms, or from animals brushing up against them, or equipment brushing up against them. And that makes them vulnerable to the fungi that lead to heart rot. Maple leaf patterns. Red maples can have either 3 or 5 lobes. Typical red maple leaf having 3 lobes here, and the bottom is one having 5 lobes. And all have relatively sharp pointed teeth, and the dips between the lobes are pointy and again tend to be V-shaped as opposed to the U shape that we see with the notches in the sugar maples. And the stems of red maples are typically red. Red maples do produce flowers in the spring, once again, these appear before the leaves appear, and the flowers are red, and they're male flowers, which you see up top. You see multiple stamens here, and the bottom are showing the female flowers. The red maple leaf seeds, or samaras, again, are usually dropped by the end of spring, whereas the sugar maples tend to hold on to their seeds until fall. And most of, again, now it's June, so most of those samaras that you're seeing on the ground now are maple leaf, red maple samaras. In the fall, the leaves do change colors. Again, the left is a striped maple, which we really don't have much here. They tend to turn yellow in the fall. The red maple turns red in the fall. And the sugar maple usually turns kind of an orangish color in the fall. So they all contribute to the colorful fall foliage. So again, everything is red about the red maples. The leaves turn red in fall, the stems are red, the twigs are reddish, the buds are reddish, the flowers are red, and even the samaras are red. So everything is red. Red maples do have value for wildlife. The red maple is a food source for several wildlife species. And white-tailed deer use the current season's growth of red maple as an important source for food in the winter. And as we mentioned before, many butterflies and moths utilize the leaves as food. Again, basically we're talking about the caterpillars of the butterflies and moths. And we'll talk specifically about the rosy maple moth. Very interesting. Squirrels also eat the buds. The samaras may be eaten by squirrels, chipmunks, white-footed mice, and several bird species. And older red maples often develop cavities, and those serve as good nesting sites for a variety of bird species, especially wood ducks in some of our riparian areas. The red maple moth is very interesting. It's this very colorful moth, kind of yellow and pink colored. And its caterpillar is the green stripes mapleworm, which you see down here. And it takes a large population of these to actually defoliate the maple. But perhaps the most interesting thing about this adult rosy maple moth is that it doesn't have a mouth. Nor does it have a digestive system. So it can only live for about 2 to 9 months. And basically, it's living on the energy that was provided via this caterpillar. Very interesting. So do red maples produce syrup? Yes, they do. The answer is yes. They produce sap, and it can be turned into syrup that tastes pretty much the same as syrup from sugar maples, so it's not as sweet because it has a lower sugar content. And again, if you have a higher sugar content, it means that you don't need to do quite as much boiling to produce the syrup. So sugar maples are much more coveted for making syrup than red maples. And red maples do bud and flower early in the season, and that has a negative effect on the sap. So the syrup season is relatively short for the red maples compared to sugar maples. We also, interestingly, have some mountain maples here. Whereas the red maples and the sugar maples are the most abundant maples, we do have some mountain maples. And they're especially common on exposed ledges and steep slopes. So here at Eastman, we most often see them where the land slopes down from the West Lake Trail to Eastman Lake. It's basically an understory tree. Actually, I consider it more of a bush because it never really grows to be of much height. And being a maple, it does have that opposite branching pattern. And the leaves are simple, 2.5 to 3 inches long and almost as wide. And they tend to have three lobes and coarse teeth. We'll show you some of them in a minute. The stalks may be red. And the flowers bloom in June and appear as greenish white or greenish yellow erect clusters, usually anywhere from 1 to 3 inches tall. And the seeds, again, are winged samaras, and they're either pink or at least red tinged. This is showing a picture of these leaves. I took this photo actually here in early June, and the leaves are relatively big. They have three lobes, coarse teeth, uh, and note this greenish flower cluster that's right here. There's another one that's up here. And if you look way back here, you see actually several of these little flower clusters that are sticking up. Mountain maples, again, are basically an understory tree. Actually, I tend to call them a bush because they never really get big enough to be as big as most things we consider trees. And again, they often occur on ridges or steep hillsides. So as I mentioned, we'll see them here at Eastman, basically off the lake trail where it funnels down to Eastman Lake. Several species do browse on the mountain maple. In fact, it's a preferred winter food for a white-tailed deer. And no doubt about it, if we go back and look at the picture here, some of these leaves almost, when they're down kind of toward the ground, actually almost resemble what you see in your hostas. And if you remember, hostas are a favorite food for our white-tailed deer. So again, they are a preferred winter food for our white-tailed deer. Moose and beaver may also browse on them. Some people actually call these moose maples rather than mountain maples. Ruffed grouse may eat the buds. Beetles and aphids may eat the leaves. And like I said before, it's basically a bush, so it really has no economic or commercial value, but it certainly has value for wildlife. So that's a little bit about maple trees. We hope that you've enjoyed this and learn more about these on our Eastman YouTube channel.